Packers fans, stay up to date on all of your Packers news this season via our newsletter. You can sign up for the PackersNews.com and more Journal Sentinel newsletters by clicking on the link in the brief field of this video. Packers fans, welcome into the Green 19 podcast from JS Online and PackersNews.com. I'm Kassidy Hill, joined as always by Tom Silverstein and Ryan Wood. A little bit scattered now because the season is over and we all kind of retreat back to our own little, I don't know about y'all, but I retreat back into my little hermit hole for about the next 3 weeks or so here. Hibernate, just get on my snacks and my coffee, and I hibernate in my apartment for a couple of weeks and kind of take back over the season, think back over everything before looking ahead. I know y'all have been doing the same because we've had a little bit of extra time to do that this season. This Packers team did not make the playoffs after a Week 18 loss to the Detroit Lions. Ryan, I saw you tweet about this the other day, and it's a great point. They're sitting at home watching an NFC playoffs that they could probably walk right through, or at least for the first round.
Kassidy, it is so amazing how triggered people got off that tweet, too. Like, look, I'm not saying the Packers are good. I just saw them for 17 games. I have eyes. I know they're not good, but they were really good the last couple years, and they picked a terrible time to be bad.
Yeah.
Because this NFC is not good either. And you've got to be sick of the Packers watching this at home. But you know what? They have only themselves to blame.
Yeah, their best shot probably would have been facing Minnesota. And if nothing else, at least they have that. Their defeat of Minnesota in Week 17 dropped the Vikings down to a 3 seed, which meant they drew the Giants, and the Giants sent the Vikings home early in the first round. And the Packers players we saw on Twitter relished and took a second victory lap after that Vikings loss. But Spoon, a little too late if you're tweeting from the couch during a playoff game, right?
Yeah, and then the Detroit Lions were tweeting probably to the Packers, like, "Oh, what are you guys talking about? You know, we just whipped your butt on your own home field." So, I don't know. I wholly believe that if the Packers had made the playoffs, they would have gotten their butts kicked in San Francisco.
Yes.
I'm convinced of that. You know, San Francisco, Seattle was closer than I thought, but it was pouring rain. Seattle's a division opponent. They know the 49ers. I think the Packers would have just got quashed. I think they were better off not making the playoffs and, you know, getting a higher draft pick, because I just don't think they would have been competitive against San Francisco or Philadelphia this year.
You know, the only thing about that, I agree. I have eyes. I see the same thing. This Packers team was so confounding. Like, as soon as you thought one thing with this team, they just went and did the exact opposite. So I would have picked the 49ers to win. I don't think it would have been close. But and I've stayed away from what Aaron Rodgers is, how he's described this team, because it's so cliche. I mean, it just makes me want to gag. It's so cliche. But he's right when he says that at their best they could beat anyone, and they could lose to literally anyone too. You just never knew what you were going to get from this team. So that's the only kind of outside puncher's chance that I would have given them, is that on the very few occasions they put it together, they were actually a pretty respectable team. It was just really, 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 really rare that happened.
Yeah, and I should clarify, excuse me, when I said I thought they would walk through the first round, I meant if they had drawn Minnesota, but I don't think there was a chance of that happening, correct? They would have had
a 49ers.
No, they couldn't.
Right. So now, you know, things start to look ahead, but before you can look ahead, you kind of have to look back over your season. What happened? What went right? What went wrong? What do you fix in the off season? Nothing can really happen until the Aaron Rodgers of it all is answered, and we will get into that. But if you are Brian Gutekunst, and Spoon, I'll start with you. If you're Brian Gutekunst, if you're Matt LaFleur, without looking at the Aaron Rodgers part of it yet, maybe start on defense then. What is the first thing you're touching? What is the first thing you're looking at?
Well, you know, the first thing overall I'm looking at is where they ranked in offense and defense, and it really told the whole story. I mean, if you look at the remaining playoff teams, they have either a top 10 defense, a top 10 offense, or both. And I think the Giants are the only team that doesn't have that. The Giants would be the only team with worst rankings, offense and defense. The Packers were 17th in offense, 17th in defense. That just doesn't get it done. I mean, you have to hang your hat on something, and they didn't hang their hat on anything last year. And, defensively, I mean, I think they'll get better through experience. They got some young guys that will continue to get better, but offensively, they gotta figure a lot of things out. They're just not the same team they were, and their quarterback's not the same, and they got to figure it out because they just had a really bad year all the way around on offense.
I mean, so Ryan, I'll come to you. Is that the first step? Like you can't do anything until you know what you're going to do with Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, I wrote about this out of our conversation with Brian Gutekunst last week, and he's in a really weird balancing position where he's got to kind of swerve between two lanes, a really slow lane with Aaron Rodgers and the fast lane. I mean, there's a lot of things outside the quarterback that do need to be figured out, from Aaron Jones to David Bakhtiari to Joe Barry to Mason Crosby to Keisean Nixon. I mean, there's a lot, but all those things can be figured out pretty swiftly. A lot of those things hinge on what they do with Aaron Rodgers, and that's not going to be swift. That's going to take time. Sure sounds like from early impressions that they want him back. I mean, when Brian Gutekunst is asked point blank, who gives you a better chance to win next year, and he says Aaron Rodgers, kind of puts himself into a corner. What is the point of all this if not to win? If you feel that way, then you're putting yourself in that position to retain Aaron Rodgers. So we'll see. I mean, it's not going to be a swift process, but a lot of these things are kind of on hold until they decide the direction they're going with the quarterback.
Spoon, let me ask you this. It's easy for us to say, especially as a general manager, you should sit back and look at the future. Look at your whole big board. Look at what you want to start, building blocks for down the road. But given what this team has done the past few years and what this team has been capable of the past few years and where they have fallen short, is it safe to say maybe if you're Brian Gutekunst, you have to have tunnel vision over the next 2 years, 2 or 3 years, and think, okay, if this team doesn't make it to the Super Bowl in the next 2 years, I'm out of a job. So what are we going to do in the next 2 years?
Well, yeah, I think that's always true of every general manager looks at the big picture, but I don't know if it's 2 years. I think I don't know if it's that, but the one thing I'll say is that I think you said it as the Packers have to make a decision, and I think it's really Aaron Rodgers' decision. And the Packers have to go along with whatever it is, because I don't think they can do anything financially to get rid of him. I mean, they could try to trade him, but if he wants to stay and he wants to play, they can't trade him because he'll just retire if they trade him to some team, and the trade will be void. I think they're fully committed to having him back, and it's all a matter of whether he wants to play or not. I just think the way that contract was done, they painted themselves in a corner, and they have to. Their best way to be competitive is to have him back. Now, that doesn't necessarily, to me, if I'm Brian Gutekunst, that doesn't necessarily mean Jordan Love's out of the picture. I mean, if Aaron Rodgers stinks, or if he gets hurt, which is he's getting older, and that point's going to come. And if he gets hurt and Jordan Love takes over and starts winning, that's how, guys like that lose their jobs. That's how retirements come about. The guy finally loses his job. So I think they go in with Aaron Rodgers, but Jordan Love is still the heir apparent, and they have to have the thought that, yeah, they're going for it again. And whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love, that's what they'll have to do.
If you're Jordan Love, though, and I totally get what you're saying. If you're Jordan Love, though, and you're sitting there across the table from Matt LaFleur and you're hearing that, hey, Aaron Rodgers is coming back, and we know that, you've been sitting on the bench for years now, almost the entirety of your rookie contract, are you asking for a trade?
Sure, but you aren't getting one. I mean, they got you under contract for, $2 million for next year and then $20 million for 2024. And so he's got no options. He's stuck.
In the absence of the trade demand that won't get met, if I'm Jordan Love, I'm asking for a second contract. I'm asking for another year or two tacked on for some security to go beyond that 5th-year guarantee. Okay, you want me to sit in a corner and wait my turn, be a good backup quarterback, and do my job in that role when you're wasting my early years of my career? Give me a little security. I think that'd be an interesting play from his side.
I think that's would be a fair ask too.
Well, in the old days, he could have held out, but now you get fined when you hold out. So he has no options. I mean, players are screwed when they're into contracts, particularly 5-year deals. He's got no other option but to do it. He could be an unhappy camper and try to get his way out of it. He could skip, off-season workouts. But none of it is going to get the Packers to change that situation. I think they still think he's the quarterback of the future.
Is he?
Well, I think only time will tell, but it's a little like deja vu because it was almost a year ago, not quite a year ago, because they didn't go as far this year as they went last year. But almost a year ago, I'm sitting in this comfy chair. We're talking about the quarterback situation. Spoon, I think if I remember right, you were on board with them rebuilding then. Is that correct?
The day they lost, I wrote that they need to trade Rodgers right then and there.
That's what I thought. And the only hang up for me was how bad the NFC was going to be, which turned out to be the case. Now it just turned out that the Packers were worse than how bad the NFC was going to be. But they swerved one way when I think history is showing that last year was the time to execute the rebuild. That they waited too late. Yep. I mean, if you watch these 17 games, look, quarterback play is everything in this league. There's a reason why Tom Brady's teams win Super Bowls. There's a reason why the Chiefs were nothing until Patrick Mahomes came to town, and then they're a perennial number 1 seed in the AFC. There's a reason the Packers have been perennial contenders atop the NFC, a favorite to win the Super Bowl, while Aaron Rodgers is winning 4 MVPs, and there's a reason they're 8-9 this year. It all starts with quarterback play. And if you're going to hang on to this quarterback the way they did a year ago and miss the playoffs, that just can't happen. And now with the contract that they gave, the Spoon's point, it compounds a problem. And in this league, compounding mistakes on mistakes is not a good way to live. It's not a good way to go for an organization. But because of the corner they're painted in, they don't have much option here. And if you look, bring it back to Jordan Love, small sample size alert, and I have no idea if given the entire season, it's probably doubtful that Jordan Love would have been better than Aaron Rodgers this season. But in his small sample size, Jordan Love played better than Aaron Rodgers. And again, we have no idea how that would look over the course of 1,000+ snaps, 17 starts. But in his small sample size, he looked like the better quarterback. And it has to be tantalizing to wonder, could that stretch into a full season? But they're not going to get that chance.
My question is, who got the better deal, Seattle or Green Bay? Seattle traded Russell Wilson and got a bunch of draft picks and drafted Kenneth Walker, drafted Tariq Woolen. They drafted an starting offensive tackle. They got Noah Fant out of that trade. And they had Geno Smith they didn't have a Jordan Love. So,
Yeah.
they still have to address their quarterback, but the Packers had a quarterback and could have had all those pieces if they'd done it. And I don't know ultimately whose decision it is, but it was a huge fail. And I think some of it has to fall on Mark Murphy's lap, because I'm sure he had a say in, the marketing aspect of Aaron Rodgers is huge for Green Bay, and they want to keep making money. But, the GM should have made that move. And, of course we can say in retrospect, it was a lousy move because they stunk this year, but I would have done it last year. And I think they blew it.
And hey, by the way, Spoon, just to put a tie on that comparison, Seattle got all those things. They also got another thing the Packers didn't get. That's a playoff berth.
Yeah.
They got into the playoffs. The Packers, with Aaron Rodgers hanging on, they did not.
And freedom from a controlling player in their locker room.
It might also be said, though, that Geno Smith is a better option than Jordan Love. But at the same time, you might not have known at the time that Geno Smith was going to be a better option. Like, outperform what we thought he would.
Yeah, maybe. We don't know what Jordan Love could do. I mean, every time we saw Jordan Love play this season, and it was not in crunch time situations. So there's a lot of unknown here. I'm not saying Jordan Love is going to be a great quarterback. We have no idea. But every single time we saw him play in his mop-up duty, he looked good. He was crisp. He was accurate. He was on time. He was a different quarterback from when we saw him a year before. So we don't know, but there's signs there that they might have something there. They won't be able to figure it out.
Well, and the Packers would have drafted a quarterback if they had traded Rodgers. They would have drafted another quarterback or signed a veteran. And who knows, maybe they would have drafted Brock Purdy and they'd be off and running with two young quarterbacks. I just that's going to go back and haunt them like the Hadel trade. I don't know. I think it is anyway.
I'm looking over some of Rodgers' numbers because we focus so much on the field part of it, which makes sense. That's the number one priority. But I was just looking over the numbers too, and they're making my head swim. There's just so many of them. But essentially, the high points are, if Rodgers retires, or let's see, Rodgers is guaranteed $59 million. If he retires, he would be forfeiting his rights to that. He said it after the season, it wasn't about the money. Guys, can anybody actually walk away from that much money? Especially when you want to doesn't he want to buy a sports franchise or buy a sports team?
Well, maybe. I mean, he's partially invested in the Milwaukee Bucks, but he's not buying them. I mean, they're $1 billion franchise. But he could be an investor somewhere. Yeah.
And let's see, if he's traded, Green Bay would have, sounds like it's a little over $40 million of dead money by trading him. But a team could also pick that up, right? Spoon, do you know the
no? So
of that?
They would have to take in, I forgot, it's 40-something million dead on the cap. That's what it would be if they traded him. There's no negotiating that. They'd have to trade the option bonus that goes with the contract. Maybe he would be willing to renegotiate it, but it would go along with the team, because they would not exercise it. They would make the other team exercise it. They have till week 1 of the regular season to exercise that option. And if you don't exercise that option, that $58.3 million becomes base salary. And then all of a sudden his cap number is $99 million. Mm-hmm. So they have to trade the contract. And even if they do, it's still, he's going to count $40 million, but that's part of doing business.
If he does acquiesce to a trade, just for fits and giggles, let's toss a couple of scenarios out there. If you're Rodgers, where's the most alluring team? And if you're the Packers, which team would you most want to do business with? I'm going to throw out my first 2 picks. we've long said the 49ers, but I don't know if that's as much of a draw as maybe the Raiders and Tennessee.
The Raiders I can see. I would still put 49ers number one. And I think from the Packers standpoint, if they were to go the trade route, it wouldn't be prohibitive that they're trading him to another NFC contender because you have to do that. Look, Aaron Rodgers wasn't ready in 2008 to lead a team to the Super Bowl. You have to do that knowing it's going to be a couple years and you're starting a rebuild from the ground up until you're running. So you just get the best deal you can. If that's San Francisco, that's San Francisco. You get the most assets you can, and you start that rebuild. So I would put 49ers number one. But, yeah, I mean, a reunion with Devontae Adams, that makes sense.
You would have, if you go to the Raiders, you would have Devontae Adams and Darren Waller.
The reason I think the Raiders would make sense is because I think we all agree the thing that would prevent Rodgers from wanting a trade is what 40-year-old quarterback, he's going to his age 40 season, wants to start over. I mean, that's just not something that when you know an offense, when you've been entrenched in a playbook, to have to start over at that point in your career, it's not exactly an appealing option. Well, if you do have to start over, then it's nice to start over with a guy you know really, really, really well, and a guy who, without him, your game fell off a cliff in 2022, and that's Devontae Adams. So there would be some comfort with familiarity there. San Francisco, same thing. Kyle Shanahan's offense isn't that far removed from Matt LaFleur's. Obviously, Kyle Shanahan's a mentor of Matt LaFleur, and they've got a lot of pieces there where, and not to mention return to the Bay Area, there's a lot of familiarity there as well.
The biggest problem with the 49ers is they don't have a first-round draft pick. So
they have a Trey Lance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if they have a second. So that's a problem, unless you can find a player that it's worth, drafting. Yeah, I don't think they have a second round either. So that's a problem. Houston would have been a nice destination, and I think they traded every draft pick for the next 5 years. No, they got a bunch of draft picks back. That's right, from Cleveland. So they got a potential extra picks. Tennessee's got a really high pick. Are they going to trade the 11th pick for Rodgers? I don't know. I just think they will not be able to get what they were able to get a year ago. And I think they may have to settle for a lot less than what people think they're going to get.
Just FYI, the 49ers draft picks for the 2023 draft, they have 2 in round 3, both compensatory, and then they have 2 in round 5 and 2 in round 7. Yeah. That is it.
Yeah, wow. So that's difficult.
And you've got Tom Brady as a potential free agent out there.
Yeah. This is all woulda, coulda, shoulda. If it rains, what's the saying? The old children saying, if wishes and hopes were dreams and gumdrops. What am I trying to say?
I have no idea.
They used to say it on Barney all the time.
I love you, you love me.
No, it's like.
You mean if whatever, and it would be candy and nuts? That one?
No, I'm going to figure this out now.
Right. How about we cut this out?
Yeah.
If all the raindrops were lemon drops and gumdrops.
Oh, what a rain that would be.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Standing outside with my mouth open wide.
Yes, that's it.
Spoon is going to slap us. He's going to slap us silly.
Oh, what a rain that would be.
I remember that now.
Essentially, what that all boils down to is we're talking about a lot of hypotheticals. None of it matters if Aaron Rodgers decides to come back. And for as much as the Packers would probably like to say they hold the cards and can make this decision, they don't. It comes down to what Aaron Rodgers wants to do. Is that safe to say?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
But before we move on, usually we do this at the end of the podcast, but I'm going to do it right here. Before we move on, because this is such a big subject, Does anyone have any final thoughts on the Aaron Rodgers part of it?
Not really. I mean, I think I've laid it out the way it's probably going to go. The only question is he could just decide to hang it up. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he wasn't happy with the way he played and doesn't want to go out like a chump. I don't know. But my guess is that he's saying to himself, that was a fluke. I'll come back even better. I'll show everybody, I'm coming back.
Sounds like the Packers are saying that too, which I think from their end, they have to ascertain why what went wrong. Mm-hmm. And they have to really do some digging and identify and be honest with themselves. And I just from hearing what was said after this, I wonder if they're being honest with themselves, because when you look at Aaron Rodgers, you take the name out of the equation, and they didn't do that. I mean, when Brian Gutekunst said why Aaron Rodgers gave them the best chance to win, his answer essentially amounted to, because he's Aaron Rodgers. Well, Aaron Rodgers, take the name out, as a quarterback, just had his lowest passer rating of his career. He just had the fewest passing yards of his career in a season that didn't get truncated by a collarbone. He had tied for the fewest passing touchdowns of his career. He had the most interceptions since 2008, his first year as a starter. It was the only season in his career that he didn't have a 300-yard passing game. He only had 1 3-touchdown game. That was against the Cowboys. This was by far, it wasn't close. This was by far the worst year of his career. Worse than 2008, worse than 2018 when Mike McCarthy got fired. So you have to identify, why is that the case? And is it something that is avoidable in 2023? Can there actually be improvement? Are there tangible fixes? Or is this a quarterback who at 39 years old is playing like he's 39 years old and can no longer lift everyone around him? Because he had a lot of problems this year. He's had a lot of problems in the past. And in the past, he's been the difference maker that he never was in 2022. So you have to be honest with yourself about what happened, why it went wrong, can it be fixed? And if it can't, I completely agree. I mean, they're backed into a corner because of this contract. But if it can't be fixed, you have to do something about it.
Well, and what you do about it is play Jordan Love. If you have to bring Rodgers back, Jordan Love's there. You have to tell him, look, if you're playing better football than Aaron Rodgers, then we're going to play you. And you have to tell Aaron Rodgers, if he's playing better football than you are, we're going with him. And that's the choice. I mean, really, it is the choice.
Who's drawing the short straw to tell him that?
What's that?
Who's drawing the short straw to tell him that?
I mean, somebody's got to. Somebody has to. And if he's not happy with it, then maybe he accepts the trade. But, they told Brett Favre that. They told him, Aaron Rodgers is our quarterback. If you want to, you should stay retired because we are committed to Aaron Rodgers. And Favre said, I'll come back. I'll compete with him, and they ended up trading him.
You have to get past the legacy. Legacies are important. I agree. I mean, when they were 4-8, and we were talking about when are they going to play Jordan Love, I was on board with Aaron Rodgers getting the start in Chicago for the legacy. I mean, I'm not saying legacies mean nothing, but winning is the point. Like, what did Herm Edwards say? You play to win the game. Winning is more important than legacies. And if it's Aaron Rodgers next season, then play Aaron Rodgers. But this was far removed from a quarterback that was capable of carrying his team to a Super Bowl. And if there's a better option, winning is more important than a legacy.
Last thing, because I'm glad you brought this up a minute ago, Ryan. So I just wanted to ask this. You talked about identifying what went wrong and if that's able to be fixed moving forward. And Rodgers not lifting his team up this year. Y'all have covered this guy a lot longer than I have. So let me ask your opinion. Would a broken thumb, the ribs, and the rookie receivers have been as much of an issue 7 years ago? And 7's an ambiguous number. It could be any amount of years ago.
I think the bigger issue than those injuries is the fact that he's going into his age 40 season. when you've got a quarterback at this stage in his career that has accumulated injuries, and Aaron Rodgers has played through a lot of them. I mean, no one can question the guy's toughness. He's the way he returned from the collarbone in 2017 to give his team a chance going down to Carolina. I mean, the guy has played through a ton of injuries. When you have injuries accrue, it usually doesn't get better. It's not a good forecast for age 40 because you don't see aging quarterbacks just suddenly get healthier. The from a performance standpoint, I didn't think about this until after the season. I don't think Aaron Rodgers was asked this, and if he wasn't, this is a very quick question as soon as we get to talk to him next. But when his game rose again in 2020, after that first season with the Fleur, 2019 wasn't MVP caliber, and then he takes it up a level in 2020 and 2021, he attributed it, remember, to finding something in camp in that 2020 season with something with his base, his legs, his platform that he was throwing from. And I just wonder, with all the incredible amount of short underneath throws that were wildly off target, I mean, the accuracy, how shoddy it was throughout the entire season. I wonder if he got away from that. I don't know that he did. It's just something I'm wondering. But from a performance standpoint, this guy has always been accurate, and he was not accurate in 2022. I wonder if that fix he made in 2020, if that's something, and if you're the Packers, okay, are there tangible fixes? Well, if you got away from something like that, maybe there is. Maybe that's what you're hanging your hat on. I don't know. I'm just wondering here.
Spoon, we know how much Ryan likes to relate things to the Mets.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to draw a Dodgers comparison here. Back when Cody Bellinger was like an MVP, he had a unique hitting stance, but it worked. And then he tried to change it to make it better. And instead it made it worse. And it only was when he went back to his original stance in the playoffs a couple of years ago that he found his bat again. And then he tried to change it again in the offseason, and it didn't work. So all of that to say, is it trying to do too much to keep up with age when he should just go with what's always worked?
I think we're going to find out, and I don't want to make excuses for Rodgers, but I think the thumb changed his game. I think it changed his footwork. I think he tried to find ways to play with it. And for whatever reason, as the season went on, the thumb was probably healthy, but his mechanics looked kind of screwed up. Mm-hmm. And it's possible that it was all a reaction to, him not being able to really spin the ball the way he wanted with the thumb. I don't know. There's a lot of things that are possibilities. I'm not qualified to completely break down what was wrong with him, but I do think the Packers are, and they have to make that decision. But really, it's just going to come down to he's coming back, and then they have to deal with it. Okay, what's the next step? As Ryan said, do they build around him? Do they build, in other places? Or do they just leave it open that, hey, if Jordan Love's playing better, he's going to play and make it an open competition and let Rodgers know that. I think it's a long season, and Jordan Love could wind up being the starter next year at some point.
We've spent half an hour talking about Aaron Rodgers. Let's move on and look around him. As y'all both said, it's a matter of also what you put around him. This is a rookie receiver class that will be going into their second year that we saw get decent amount of playing, actually a lot of playing time and a decent amount of production from. What sort of jump, I know what sort of jump you would hope to have from Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and even Samori Toure going into next season, but what sort of jump can you reasonably expect from a group like that? Start with Watson.
Well, I would be realistic about it. I wouldn't expect him to have, 16 touchdowns next year and 1,500 yards and 120 catches. I think it's a process, and you're going to have to be patient with him because he started to see more double teams as the year went on. He started to see people get up in his face, and he's got to do a lot of work in the weight room over the course of the off season to deal with that kind of stuff. I think he can be their number one, but one of those three guys, Dobbs, Watson, well, Toure, I don't know if this would qualify, but one of them's not going to have the year that you would anticipate. It's just the odds. One of them's just going to get hurt or not perform or something. So they have to continue to build that receiver core. And, watching the Lions game, I'm not completely defending Rodgers, but you have to. There were times when there was just nobody open. Lazard couldn't get open. Cobb couldn't get open. They gotta find a slot receiver really quick who can get open. And they gotta complement. They need to get a veteran in there too.
They need a tight end too.
Yeah, they need a tight end in the worst way.
Slot receiver and like a Johan Dotson type from last year, maybe, and a tight end. They've been trying to get Darren Waller for years now, and that's probably never going to happen if it hasn't happened already. But they need a playmaking tight end. They need a slot receiver that can have your two-way goes and make plays in the middle of the field, and then pair them with your perimeter guys and Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs. Now, if they could just get a legitimate kind of test-proven number one receiver to pair with Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs, take a lot of pressure off of a couple young guys, that could go a long way. But for both of them, a lot of whatever you're going to see year two is going to be tied to quarterback play. I mean, that's just the way that receiver play works. You need a guy to get you the ball. So that's, with the uncertainty at quarterback, that makes it difficult to know what kind of year two jump you're going to see from those guys too. But I would expect that both of those guys are going to continue trending the way that we've seen them. They had really solid rookie years. I don't think the Packers could have asked for more as rookies out of Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs than what they got from a production standpoint. And that bodes well going forward.
I would just tank for that guy from Georgia next year.
Bowers.
One pick, yeah, and because he's going to change someone's team.
Yeah,
he's the next Travis Kelce, and he could make a good team really good. He
might surpass Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
Did y'all hear what Nick Saban said on the national championship broadcast?
Mm-mm.
He was talking about the Georgia tight end unit because it's not just Bowers. They've got just like a three-headed monster in that unit.
That massive guy.
Yeah, he's just
like twice as big as Mercedes Lewis.
He is. I wish I could remember that kid's name now.
Williams.
He's just a tank coming down the field, and he's a good pass-catching tight end too. And then like I said, they're led by Bowers. And Nick Saban was talking about back when he was with the Browns, he had a corner come off the field during warm-ups when they were facing the Giants. And it was back when the Giants had a tight end unit that was just like incredibly formidable and huge. And he said that corner came off the field and pointed across to the Giants tight end unit and said, "Coach, you ain't paying me enough for that." And that's kind of what you want. So that's not a bad idea, Spoon. Tank for Bowers.
Yeah.
Before we get into the veteran part of it, I mean, if you're the Packers this year, I know it's almost like a superstition at this point. You probably don't want to take a receiver in the first round, but are you at least looking at Drake Addison, or is that just adding too much young blood into that unit?
I haven't looked close enough in the draft to really know.
It's January.
But I think they need to draft an offensive tackle at some point. And if they could get like a Brian Bulaga type right away, a guy who could go in and start at right tackle, I would go for that. I mean, if you could get just a dominating, or someone at 15 is going to be pretty good. If you could get an Andrew Thomas type guy, I would do it, especially with the uncertainty with Bakhtiari in the future. To me, that's like a a huge need for them.
Safety is going to be an area to target as well, because we haven't talked about the secondary, but they got a lot to figure out there. They got Darnell Savage coming back on the 5th year guaranteed, and he was a lot better closer to the line of scrimmage than he was away from the line of scrimmage. And so you got him back. Slot corners sure look like his best spot. Well, if you put him at slot corner, what are you going to do with your 3 corners? Because, the way that they rolled out to start the season was Jair Alexander and Eric Stokes on the perimeter and Rasul Douglas in the slot. And Jair Alexander would come into the slot sometimes. Rasul Douglas, I think, showed that he can be a good player, but maybe not full-time in the slot. Eric Stokes has, talk about year 2 jumps. He had a bad year. He had a bad sophomore year. He's got to be better. And that's going to be a big offseason for him. How do you, the musical chairs of that cornerback group, if you're putting Darnell Savage at corner, to Spoon's eternal point, do you finally go with Rasul Douglas at safety? Adrian Amos is a free agent. Is he coming back? If he's not, well, you got to probably draft if you can get a playmaking safety, it goes a long way. So I think safety's a position that they're going to have to look at this offseason as well.
And I apologize. I said Drake Addison. I meant Jordan Addison. For some reason, I keep wanting to call him Drake, but Jordan Addison is who I was thinking of. So I do want to get into that defensive part of it, but before we do, just kind of wrapping up the offensive part of it, we saw them, in theory, bring in a veteran receiver last year in Sammy Watkins, and it just didn't work out. What type of veteran do they need to go after? I mean, are you wanting – because is there any chance Randall Cobb is back?
Depends on if Rodgers is back.
Even
No,
if Rodgers
I don't think there's any way he's back. I could be wrong, but I just can't see them bringing him back.
So you need that leadership, but you also need production, because you didn't really – I mean, Randall Cobb still showed up huge on some third downs, as he is apt to do, but you didn't really get production from Cobb or Watkins like you had hoped. So what's the number one priority when you're looking at a veteran receiver here?
Well, if they just go get DeAndre Hopkins, it would be great for them. They'd be
on to Jacksonville, haven't you heard?
You want to go back a year. If they can just go get DK Metcalf off the Seahawks, they'd be in real good shape. They just get a guy like that.
Yeah, they'd
be great. In the more realistic terms, you're probably looking at an Allen Lazard type. They bringing in a Sammy Watkins. I mean, could his season have been any more predictable? He had that one good game week 2. He got hurt immediately after. Sammy Watkins getting injured. What? Like it derailed his season. He didn't finish the year. So, and that's why they laid out an incentivized contract for him, because they knew the risk that they were getting into. If you're going to just bring in veteran gambles, I don't see a lot of point in that. A guy like Allen Lazard he's a known quantity in one way that was really big for this offense. He's a great blocker at that position, and you're probably bringing back Aaron Jones. You're restructuring the contract there because he's your best player. You're going to be a team that needs to run the ball still. Having a blocking receiver that's a veteran like Allen Lazard goes a long way. But an Allen Lazard type is probably the best that they're going to do, and I would stay away from the Cobbs and the Watkins veteran gambles that will probably go exactly how you expect them to go.
If you want an Allen Lazard type, why not keep Allen Lazard?
Why not keep Allen Lazard? It depends on what his market is. He views himself as a number one receiver. I don't know that the market's going to match that, and if it doesn't, I would absolutely bring Allen Lazard back.
So you're thinking the Packers would want to keep Allen Lazard, but it may be Allen Lazard that wants to go elsewhere?
I would imagine he's going to test the market.
Spoon, do you think he'll get a return on what he's hoping for?
I don't think he'll get what he wants, but I think he'll probably go somewhere else. I think the Packers are going to value speed as much as anything. I think they need to. They sort of started to value it on defense finally, and I think they need more of it on offense. They need to be able to spread the field more than they can. They got too many possession type guys. And so I mean, there will be a veteran who comes free. I mean, there's a lot of teams that have cap issues. Someone will draft someone and decide they they don't need a veteran. There'll be guys that'll come through, and there may be some, more talented guys than we think. It's possible. I don't know how active the Packers can be. A lot of that depends on, what happens with Rodgers, but there'll be opportunities.
You also mentioned both the tight end part of it. I mean, as you said, they're probably not going to get Darren Waller at this point. Tanya did tell us after the season that this is where he wants to be, but if you're the Packers, is it worth holding that spot for him? I mean, to see if maybe another year off the ACL can make a difference, or do you kind of know what you have there and you need to look around on the market?
Only for depth. If it's a depth, then it might be depth, then sure, bring Tanya back. But the quickest avenue they have offensively to adding playmaking ability in their pass game is going to be tight end. If they can find a tight end, that would go a long way. That's an area of big need, whether they have Robert Tonyan or not.
Spoon?
I would look for them to continue to pursue Waller during the offseason. I think that's not dead. I think it really kind of depends on the Raiders. I'm sure Gutekunst would give up a second right now for him, and that second looks better now than it probably did during the regular season when people thought the Packers were going to, go to the playoffs. So I would not rule that out. But like I said, that's up to the Raiders how things go during their off season. But it wouldn't be surprising to me if they made that move, and that would be enough to me if they could add him and then get a veteran receiver for the receiver room. I think, and I might even draft another receiver too. Maybe a slot guy or something like that. That might be enough to pick the offense up.
That's a very good point, because the Raiders with Tom Brady versus the Raiders with Jarrett Stidham are going to be two very different teams for Darren Waller.
Yeah, and I forgot what the Raiders are under the cap. I don't think they're terrible. I think they've got some cap room. But Waller, I'm going to look it up right now. He counts. He's one of their higher guys. So, I just think that's not dead. We'll see.
Spoon, to your point about drafting a receiver, when you say speed, I'm just making I could be totally wrong, just a prediction. But I think if you're going to draft speed at receiver, or if you're going to add speed at receiver, you're probably doing that through the draft. It's not a lot of proven speedy receivers that just become available on the open market from year to year. But I think that's not a bad avenue for them to take either, is to go draft another receiver high and continue adding to that room and build a young nucleus that whoever the quarterback is can grow with, whether that's Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love or someone you draft. I think that room needs more talent. It does need more speed. They've got a lot of possession types, but to me the draft is the more likely way to go with that.
Yeah, unless there's a bunch of guys getting cut, the receiver market's not going to be very good in free agency. But that's the whole key, is who's going to get let go and who's up for, being traded and that kind of stuff. But I kind of agree. I would be still fishing for wide receivers in the draft.
Maybe that'll be the Addison guy, but no, they're not going to get him that high. Or he's going to go way too high for that. Let's do look at the defensive part of it. We do know that defensive backs coach Jerry Gray has been requested for interviews with various teams. Haven't heard about any other assistants yet, but that could come as teams get knocked out of playoffs and start looking at their coaching carousel. It sounds, though, like Joe Barry will be here next year as the defensive coordinator no matter what. We saw this defense start to take an upward trajectory towards the latter half of the season. Spoon, if you're the coach and you're the GM, is that enough? Was that enough to save Joe Barry's job? Or are you looking at the full picture of the season here?
Well, it's not for me. I'm probably not privy to all the things that went on defense. I mean, I think there's probably some things we don't know about in terms of how that chemistry worked. And it's funny because Leroy Butler and I used to argue quite a bit on 5 questions. And he kept telling me, the players are not executing the system. He's like, the system is okay, but the players aren't executing it. And I used to argue, well, the system doesn't seem very good. And I think LaFleur made the decision that the scheme is good, and with some tweaks in it, that it could be pretty good with the players they have. I don't know if I agree with that. I would bring, just like he wants to bring in Hackett possibly for his offense, I would bring in some kind of veteran defensive guy to oversee everything, and it's not going to be Fangio. It's probably not going to be Brandon Staley.
I was about to ask about him.
It's going to be, I don't know. They'd have to find someone who's kind of near the end and wants to help out.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand what Leroy's saying, but is it not the kiss of death for a coach that can't adapt his scheme to his players? And yes. It just seems like if you try to force your players into your scheme instead of your scheme to your players, it never goes well.
It's terrible, yeah. And I didn't get a chance to ask Gutekunst this. I wanted to, but I felt like asking him, well, why don't you start drafting some zone corners? If you're gonna, if you got a coach who plays all this zone, why do you keep drafting guys who are man-to-man cover guys? I mean, of course, man-to-man cover guys are what you want, and they're valuable, and press coverage is great. But if all you're playing is zone, draft a Casey Hayward type guy, who can sit back and loves to play zone. I think that's something they got to talk about.
I mean, Ryan, you've been kind of quiet through this, but what's your 2 cents on it?
I can only see one of 2 explanations for this defense this past year, and both of them demand major change. Either they did not have the right defensive coordinator, or they wildly missed on player eval, because they have 7 first-round picks and they have expensive free agents at all levels, from Preston Smith to Devondre Campbell to Rasul Douglas to Adrian Amos. There was no rational explanation for why this defense would finish 17th in the league in yards and points. This had the makings of a top 10 defense. It should have been a top 10 defense. They even got more depth as the season went on than what we would have expected at places like edge rusher. And they, until the last 5 games, when they're going against Baker Mayfield in his second week in the offense with the Rams, and Tua Tagovailoa, who was concussed for the second half, until the last 5 games when they were not going against the cream of the crop, they didn't play like they were supposed to. So short of one or the other, Spoon, maybe you have a better explanation than I do, but it's got to be one or the other. And there was a very clear disconnect all season until the very end between the scheme and the players. It wasn't a fit. So right. To run that back, I don't get it.
I think Kassidy brought up the most important part, is that, yes, you do have to adapt your talent. And I thought he did a better job of that in the second half. But look what it took for him to do it. They had to bottom out, basically. And that was still while Rashawn Gary was healthy, and being somewhat of a force. The very best coaches get the very most out of the very best players. And if your very best players aren't playing very well, like Jair Alexander wasn't playing that great in the early part of the season, Gary was pretty good. Kenny Clark wasn't playing very good in the beginning of the season. Rasul Douglas wasn't playing very good. Eric Stokes wasn't playing very good. If Devondre Campbell didn't play the same way, if your coach is not getting the most out of those type of guys, then something's wrong.
It's very clear that the last 5 games of the season is what Matt LaFleur was hanging on to for why to keep Joe Barry. And they finished 17th in yards and points, 336 yards allowed, 21 points allowed. In the last 5 games, you just take those 5 games, they were down to 322 in yards, which would have been 8th in the league, and 17 in points, which would have been 2nd in the league. So there was clear improvement. But at what point do you ask what you're seeing, whether or not that's fool's gold? Because a year ago, they gave up 2 field goals to Kyle Shanahan's offense in a playoff game that the defense dominated. Should have been enough to win. And they felt really good about the defense. Brian Gutekunst said early in the offseason last year, we got a salty defense now. It's defense you can go and win games with. And it didn't happen through the most crucial portion of the season, which was that 5-game losing streak, when the defense, other than a game in Washington, a game in Detroit, I mean, they fell apart in Philadelphia. There were some incredibly low moments that were inexcusable for a defense built like this in really key portions of the season. So at what point is it fool's gold where the thing that you saw for the large portion of the season is reality, and that small sample size at the end of the year, that's the break from the norm. Why is there reason to think that it wasn't until Joe Barry's job was on the line that he changed things up? Well, you just gave him a vote of confidence. Why is there reason to think that what happened last year after that San Francisco performance isn't going to repeat itself with this vote of confidence, and he'll be stale, he'll be vanilla, he'll be basic, he won't be aggressive, and it will be that same disconnect next season?
For better or for worse, it sounds like it'll be Joe Barry's defense again next year. Ryan, as you said, 7 first-round picks on this defense, though. I mean, is it as simple as moving Darnell Savage closer to the ball and, getting Quay Walker under some anger management courses? Or, I mean, if you're going to have the same DC back, what do you do with these players to kind of make things work? Which is a really simple question for a very complex answer, I'm sure.
Well, get them to play the system as it's supposed to be played, or adapt the system to your players' strengths. It's one or the other, because the disconnect.
That's simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done. I get that.
Yeah.
But one or the other has to happen, because without that, you have a scheme that doesn't match your personnel.
Yeah. I mean, Spoon, are you moving Darnell Savage around if you're Joe Barry? Are you you're going to get Eric Stokes back, but do you plug him right back into the lineup? Like, now that you kind of know what you have with Kingsley and Igbare, like, what do you do with that once what do you do with him once Rashawn Gary comes back? Like, what are your biggest questions heading into the offseason if you're Joe Barry?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of personnel issues. There's 1 or 2, where you're going to play guys, but all that stuff will work itself out in training camp. I think it's more about preparing for what they're going to do on defense, trying to stay a step ahead of the league instead of being a step behind. It always felt like they were a step behind everybody else. And I think they got to really break down what they do, start incorporating some things that people don't expect from them, and highlight their very best players. That's it.
Like blitzing?
Maybe. I don't know. Whatever it is that, they just have to be better at what they do. And they have to, be creative.
Well, Spoon hit it right on the head with press man versus zone. Like, that's probably the biggest thing to figure out. You got press man corners in a zone scheme. So when I say play one or the, I mean, they gotta figure that out.
Yeah. Well, they did a better job of using press, playing, man under kind of concepts. And maybe that's the kind of defense they got to be with these type of corners. I mean, maybe Barry has to change. Maybe he can't play a proliferation of zone, and he has to play a combination zone and man. I don't know.
As Ryan said, what we know of this scheme, that would probably be considered not vanilla enough to run. But we shall see. Before we wrap up, the one side of the ball we haven't talked about yet is special teams. So I do want to touch on this before we wrap up. Ryan, I'm going to start with you because I know you wrote about Mason Crosby a few days ago. What do you kind of see for the future of the Packers at that position?
I think it depends on the future of the quarterback. If they run Aaron Rodgers back, I think they bring Mason Crosby back. He's made it very clear he's not retiring. He felt really good. His kickoffs, clearly, he had the lowest kickoff percentage of his career. That's going to be an issue if they bring him back that they're going to have to figure out. But from field goal standpoint, he righted the ship after 2021. He finished really, really strong. Made some really impressive kicks late in the season at Lambeau Field. So he's not retiring. And if they bring Aaron Rodgers back, we know Brian Gutekunst values Mason Crosby's big game experience and his institutional knowledge of kicking inside Lambeau Field.
The kickoff part of it, though, is crucial. So,
yeah.
In Spoon, if you're the Packers, are you trying to keep Ramiz Ahmed on your roster just for that, or are you looking elsewhere at a kicker that can handle both?
Yeah, I think I would keep. So I would say midway through the year, I kind of thought Mason Crosby's leg was kind of dead. And I think he showed later in the year that it wasn't, that he could get the ball up in the air and get at a decent distance. He's not Justin Tucker, he's not going to, he's probably not going to be that great from 50 out, but he's extremely accurate from 49 in. And I would rethink. I mean, if they were thinking of getting rid of him, I would rethink it. And I think the way the practice squad is set up now, where you can keep a kicker on the practice squad and bring him up when you need him, I would seriously think about bringing him back. As long as I felt physically he was doing okay, and I think he did show that his leg got a little stronger as the season went on.
Yeah. I want to say he's like 1 of 4 from 50 out.
That's correct.
Yeah.
He had 4 misses this past season, which was much better than 2021. 3 of them were from 50, and the 4th was a blocked field goal against the Jets.
Shoot, the Cowboys kicker had 4 misses last night off like extra points.
Quick point on that. Because everyone in the NFL is talking about it, right? Mike McCarthy, is there any question he's going to stick with Brett Maher? Because he's been through this so many times with Mason Crosby, and he was so patient time and time and time again. And a lot of times, almost every time, Mason Crosby rewarded that patience. His whole career has been up and down and being able to bounce back from adversity. So I found that fascinating to see Mike McCarthy have a kicker go through that, knowing what Mason Crosby went through at times. Maybe thinking that 2018 game in Detroit, Spoon.
Nobody gets yips worse than kickers.
It's something.
Stand by that. Last thing on special teams, how hard do you work to bring back Keisean Nixon, who was here on a 1-year deal? Not everybody.
Give him the house. That's all I would say. I don't have anything more to say than that. Give him the house. Whatever he wants, he gets.
Gotta have him.
So if you're Keisean Nixon, you write a number down on a Post-it note, just walk in and slap that down on Brian Gutekunst's desk. There you go. We're your new agents, Keisean Nixon. We're going to get you the bag.
You know what I don't know, Spoon? You probably, I'm sure you know this better than I do, but I don't know this because, let's face it, since I've been on the beat first year 2014, I haven't had to consider what a market price is for a really good return specialist because the Packers haven't had one. And like that, I have no idea what that looks like.
If he's smart, he tries to get a contract as a nickel corner, not a return specialist.
Right. I think that's going to be the part where he tries to sell himself that as more than just a returner. But, his value, It may be that they have to let him hit the market and let the market determine the value. Sometimes that's not a bad idea. I'm sure you would think he wants to come back. He turned down more money to play with Bisaccia, to come and play for Bisaccia during free agency last year. So that he feels really comfortable and feels, a bond with Bisaccia. So you might just have to do it and then match whatever he gets out there.
Yeah. These are questions that will inevitably be answered in the coming weeks. But as we have said time and time and again, none of them can be answered until Aaron Rodgers makes his decision. So just last thing, last 30 seconds, put your over-under on when we get an Aaron Rodgers decision. Spoon?
I don't think it'll be till March. I'm guessing it'll be a while. That's a big decision, if he's maybe in his mind he's already returning and he'll just announce it on McAfee in a week or two.
He goes on McAfee today.
Oh, does he really?
Yep, and McAfee teased it as huge news, but it might just be, that he's starting a T-shirt line or something.
Yeah, well, we'll all be listening then. So, so it'll either be today or it'll be in March. That's my prediction.
Today or March. Well, really hedging your bets there. Ryan?
If it's today, do we have to do the podcast all over again?
No, we're just going to roll with it.
All right.
I would guess it's going to be between after the combine and before free agency in March. That's Aaron Rodgers said he's not going to hold the Packers hostage. He said the same thing last year, and he did not hold them hostage. I think he'll stick true to that timeline.
The one thing about his contract is they have until week 1 to solve it. Nothing gets accelerated. His cap is what it is right now. And what happens is when they, activate the option, then, everything is in place for later years. They know what his cap number is going to be, so they can sit there and wait as long as, he can wait as long as he wants.
Don't they also get a huge, huge break if it does come down to a trade after the June 1st deadline? I think
they would, yes.
Down.
Yes, they would, but they wouldn't get any draft picks for this year. That's the problem.
That's true. Yeah. Whatever happens, we will be there to cover it for you all, unless it's today, in which case we're going to act like it happens next week. Make sure you stay tuned to PackersNews.com for full coverage of any breaking news. I know that this is kind of the time of year where we, step back a little, take a bigger look at some things, but we will be gearing up for the draft, the NFL Combine, the owners' meetings over the next couple of months here. So still lots to come your way for a packed NFL calendar, and a lot of decisions happening around the future of the Green Bay Packers. Guys, thank you as always. Go enjoy your next couple of weeks hibernating.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. This has been the Green 19 podcast from JS Online of PackersNews.com.